Hi, I'm Karen Koster, and I welcome you on Cycle of Healing Souls. Today, in this third interview with Scott Mandelker, PhD, we are going to talk about the self. So, the self that's a very interesting subject, and it's very hard to understand everything about it. So, I ended up asking a lot of questions to Scott. Like, for example, what does it mean to be conscious of self versus selfishness? What is self-sacrifice? That's very blurry subject sometimes. And what are the difference between surrender and submission in this society? That's something that sometimes, many times, is very blurry. And also, what is pride versus true humility? So we ended up, talking about all these things. And to me, again, it was a very interesting interview, and it was very interesting to hear Scott's answers about all that. So I hope it will be the case for you too. And I hope that you are well, and I wish you to be filled with love, and see you next time. Bye-bye. So Scott, thank you for coming for this third interview with you.
You're welcome.
Today I would like to focus on the self. And for that I was also remembering from the last interview that we did. During your sharing, you mentioned several times the notions of self. You said that mainly a lot of students struggle with this notion of self and even have some hard time to really detach themselves from that. I would like to go on on something I can imagine for myself, that in this society we are told really early in life that being conscious of the self is like being selfish, and that it's wrong, and that we should sacrifice ourselves for the greater good of family, school, job, countries, a lot of that. So I was wondering if you could go back to the definition of the words conscious of self and selfish, and clear that for us.
Okay. Well, the first matter would be some, basic definition or explanation of what self is, right? So in the raw material, they don't say self and other, they say self and other self, indicating the identity of what we consider self and what we consider to be not self or other people. And so self and other self means that all beings are the one self. That's a notion in Hinduism too. The Supreme Self, or Atman, or Parabrahman, or Satchitananda is the Supreme Self, and as Nityananda says, everyone is God. So everyone is God means that the essence of each person is the same, even though in time and space their personal manifestation can be quite different. So the basic idea of the law of one is that all is one. And Ra said, in each infinitesimal part of your being resides the one infinite creator and all its power. So in that kind of phrasing, you can't even say there's a part of self in each part of yourself, because the law of one means there are no parts. In unity, there's no duality, there are no sections, there are no portions, there's the one ocean of life. And the waves that appear as body, mind, spirit complex, or self, or soul, have a temporary reality, but not a permanent, or not an eternal, not a changeless reality. The only thing that's changeless is the one ocean of life, meaning all galaxies, all stars, all dimensions, all planets, all beings, all dimensions of life and consciousness and energy, right? So all of creation is vibratory, that's energy, light or energy matter. That light energy is conscious, that's love light. Right? So all love light of creation is the expression of the one infinite creator. Before there was love light, before let there be light, that's the law of one. You are dancing thoughts, you're not living in a material universe. That's the unity of all that is, all that was and is and will ever be is a manifestation of infinite life, a particular, discrete manifestation of that, like waves on the ocean. So there's the one ocean of life, which is energy consciousness or light consciousness or love light. That energy, consciousness, love light, the one ocean of life, is the one infinite creator. It is a manifestation of its source, which is before there was light. All people, or personal self, is like a wave on that vast ocean of life. In time and space, that wave has the form of a wave, has a shape, has a time span, has a life, has quality, has transformation, progression, sequence, causation, right? There are all sorts of particulars associated with the condition, the reality of a wave on the ocean. So that's what we call the self. So in Buddhism, there's no self. There's no discussion of self. It's called anatta. Anatta is an atman, which means not atman, which means no self. No self is the same as one self. In Hinduism, there's the idea of the one self, the supreme Krishna is the supreme self, or Parabrahman is the supreme self, the quality of Satchitananda, that is the supreme personality or the supreme self. All is one, all is God. So all is an expression of that supreme self, which is not a separate self. If you call the ocean of love light a self or a supreme self, that's what we're talking about. So the supreme self is the boundless ocean of love light. Now, our common sense of self is identification with body and mind. So I am this body, or I am using this body, or I am the mind. This mind is, I am angry, I am happy, I am, I am a soul, I am a wanderer. This is identification with mind. Or I am the one who's using this mind. That's a little more sophisticated. The one that uses body-mind is still not the true self or true being, but it's closer. It's really spirit. So you can identify with body, you can identify with mind, you can identify with the one that uses that, which is presence or spirit. All of that still is not the essential self. If self is understood as true identity, then, number one, there are many particular levels or qualities that we can identify with and consider our identity. Right? The person who is big and muscular and feels proud to be big and muscular identifies with body. The person who is stuck in emotion identifies with emotion. I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm afraid. The person who feels pride at their intellectual ability basically identifies with the intellect. The person who defines himself based on social positioning, I'm rich, you're poor, I'm well-dressed, you're a slob, identifies themselves with social relative position. These are all limited expressions of limited identity. Metaphysically, again, you can identify with body or social position or intellectual quality and mind. All of that is how that person would call their self. Ultimately, the nature, the question of self is the question of identity. What is your true identity? Is it body? Is it mind? Is it the one that uses body mind? Or is it something, is it the creative source of the one that's using body mind?
Because what you're saying is that the self is viewed as it's an identification of a concept to a concept.
It's a reification of a concept. The sense of self is a particular identity. I am Scott, which means what? I am the body-mind system of this lifetime, given that name by my parents. That's a common identity. There are many, many levels of self-identification that are unconscious or unrecognized, And when we talk about pride later, you'll see that. Any definition of identity, any sense of identity, any claimed or believed, cognized identity is ultimately false. As we talked about in Buddhism, the Buddha's teaching, at the highest levels of stillness and focus of mind, there's no more naming activity. The person who's really a third stage adept in Buddhism is kind of free from naming activity. Naming activity is the labeling of experience, labeling of perception, the labeling of items of consciousness, right? I am this, you are that, it is this, it is that. That is naming conceptualization. The sense of identity is yet another example of that, nothing different really. In Buddhism it's called self-cherishing. Ultimately, self-cherishing is pride, and any believed, sensed identity is a form of pride. The reason that pride is the last klesha to go, the last distortion to be dissolved, is because ultimately the false or illusory, limited sense of a self, the existence, the belief in the concept of a limited self or limited identity, the fact of self-identification, the fact that there is identification of self occurring in the mind, is pride. and it's the last one to go, because it's basically a false. It's considered putting a head on top of your head, or putting a picture frame in empty space. So ultimately, any believed notion, concept, it's a reification, it's a concretized, it's a concept or an idea in mind that has been concretized or reified into an apparent reality. And so any sense of self equals the belief in discrete or particular identity. And that can be, again, identification with any of the constituents of body-mind-spirit complex, right? Or even higher self, or wanderer, I'm a wanderer, or I'm a body, I'm a strong man, or I'm a pretty woman, or I'm so angry at you. I am this angry at you. Or I am, Mr. Kingpin Illuminati, and I can order people to kill each other. Wow, I'm great. So, or I'm Mr. Reptilian 4D negative commander of Sector Earth, and I'm a big monster too, and I can fuck anything I want. So, any of those self-reflected or internally reflected, believed notions of identity are also false, are ultimately illusory, because they they focus, they result from limited perception. If the wave looks at itself and says, I'm a wave, it's not seeing the totality of what it is part of, or what it is within, or where it is, or what it is. It's not only a wave. It's actually a wave among zillions of other waves in a unified, boundless ocean of waves and life and action and stillness and vibration, whose ultimate source, or whose ultimate nature, when you find the one who's speaking, you see who is speaking. When you find the source of your life in your being, then you go beyond separate self, and then you go beyond any notion of self. And that's why the Buddha taught anatta, meaning nibbana is anatta, the blowing out of the flame of ignorance and suffering, complete and perfect enlightenment, nibbana, nirvana, involves an experience of anatta, no self, but it's not an experience of destruction or nihilistic, termination or nothingness. It's not nothingness at all. It's basically universal presence, infinite awareness, presence, omnipresence, which is not separate from anything. And so it's the consciousness of the ocean. The idea is that the wave believes it's a wave in the ocean because it's grasping and clinging onto and not letting go of particular thoughts, particular beliefs regarding its self-reflected sense of identity. And when you let go of those thoughts, what have you got? You still have presence. You still have some awareness. But if you keep asking, who am I? What am I? This is what Ramana Maharshi's main teaching was, who am I? What am I? You find you can't define it in concept. So then you find that the self is a no-self, but the no-self is not a nothingness, it's an everything. And that everything is form and formless, and it's the alpha and the omega. I am that I am, and cannot really be defined or differentiated. That's the law of one, and that's actually beyond the law of one, because it's realization of universal infinite awareness and the identity of all as that infinity. So your true identity is ultimately the creative source of the sense of self, free of particular identification.
Thank you for this definition, extended definition of the self. What do you think about this concept that people have of the conscious of self and selfish?
Well, again, conscious of self means I'm thinking about my defined identity, right? Whatever it is that I consider to be myself, I am now aware of or perceiving. So, in English, self-conscious is different than conscious of self. Okay? In English, self-conscious normally means shy. It normally means uncomfortable perceiving self. He's self-conscious about the big pimple on his nose. So I have a big pimple on my nose, I'm feeling self-conscious, meaning heightened awareness of some problem with myself, my defined identity. Conscious of self is simply aware of that which you're considering to be yourself. I'm conscious of self, meaning I'm conscious of that which I consider to be myself, or my identity, right? Self equals identity. Our sense of self equals our defined sense of identity. So that's the value of enlightenment experience, it's said in Buddhism that at first enlightenment, sotapanna, stream entry, first of the 4 stages of enlightenment, one of the distortions or hindrances that's thrown out is a fixed belief in self, fixed belief in a separate self or a solid self, or the idea that we are the ego, so-called ego. The normal small boundedness of our sense of identity, which is basically a body or a mind identification, is dissolved somewhat significantly at that point. So conscious of self is a positive term normally, meaning I'm aware of myself, I'm aware of that which I consider within my identity, in a way of cognizant awareness, and that's different than self-conscious, which really has a negative connotation.
Okay, yeah.
So then in terms of your question, in terms of society, we could sacrifice ourselves and all of that.
Well,
that's different than selfish.
I haven't asked that question yet.
It's okay, I read it.
Yeah, what I mean is, because in this society we talk a lot about, if somebody is taking a little bit too much care of themselves, they're considered selfish. It depends on which circle, of course. So what I wanted to know is your point of view about that, because aside from the notion of self in metaphysics, but in this society, this notion of selfishness and self-sacrifice push people to do things that may harm them, actually.
I do not detect a query. Please re-question.
Yes, exactly.
For clarification.
So, what do you mean? What do you think that? What is the implication of doing self-sacrifice, and to what extent it is or it is not a path towards love? For it's like people that go to war for their country.
Well, it's complicated, because if we're simply talking about a path to love, it's not the same as a path of love. Really, in a way, you're talking about the qualification of harvestability into 4D positive.
Yes. Right.
So there are many cases. It's common understanding that one can do the right thing for the wrong reasons. One can, naively go off to war because one wants to serve one's country or protect one's loved ones. And in the case of that war, in the course of that war, although it's being fought for bankers, basically, to increase corporate profits and advance the New World Order agenda, that person can do acts of great courage and self-sacrifice, where they put the well-being of others ahead of themselves, and gain harvestability, the 4D positive. That can even happen after they've killed people, harmed people. Meaning, the person can still do negative action. Killing people with good intention is still negative action, actually. Although it depends, it depends. Killing people because you're told to is not positive action. But sacrificing yourself or giving your life to save your comrade, your buddy, who's going to be killed by somebody else, is an act of positive, compassion and self-offering in the way of love that could actually lead the person to harvestability. Killing itself, is normally not considered positive action. However, if your buddy is wounded in battle, or your enemy is wounded in battle, and they're suffering in agony, and they say, kill me, killing them is an act of compassion. because the alternative is to not kill them because you think it's bad. Meanwhile, they want you to kill them, and they're in agony, and they won't be able to get out of agony for days and days or hours and hours. And they're saying, "Do it, kill me." And you're saying, no, it's it's bad to kill, it's wrong to kill. Meanwhile, because of that belief, they're suffering in agony for hours and hours or days and days. That's an act of compassion to take them out. Absolutely. So in the case of what society teaches for self-sacrifice, even though in general the intention, the quality of mind of intention of the people who are teaching self-sacrifice, the parents, but particularly the school, the state, the corporation, the military, their teaching of self-sacrifice is self-serving, self-service, self-interest. Of course, they're telling you to sacrifice yourself for them, for their goals, for their aims, for their gain, generally, of course, including cult leaders and religious leaders.
So in terms of self-sacrifice, one should check the motivation that leads to this self-sacrifice?
You have to check everything. But mainly you need to understand what you're doing. Again, institutionally encouraged or institutionally commanded self-sacrifice from a religion, from the school, from the state, from the military situation, from the corporation. These instances of institutionally encouraged or demanded self-sacrifice are normally from negative motivation, meaning service to self pattern in that leader, in that organization, for their agenda, for their self-interest, which is self-service. However, the person who is complying may have a pure motivation, like the person who goes into the cult, whose cult leadership says, "Give us all your money and mop the floor all day, and then go out into the streets and sell these flowers, and then walk home to the ashram at 10 p.m. Alone or with your friend, because we're saving our money, we're not going to pay for your transport," which is all abuse and exploitation. The person who's doing that may have pure motivation, meaning their deepest motivation is to help the world or help what they think is a good cause or help society in some way. They're naive. They don't have wisdom. But they're seeking love. And so they're seeking to develop love by self-sacrifice, what they consider self-sacrifice, which is commanded as self-sacrifice, in that case, by a negative leadership. So some people end up signing on to the institutional demands for self-sacrifice out of pure motivation to develop love. This is not done with wisdom. It's done with love, for their own desire to make a positive difference in the world, perhaps. Now that may be associated with low self-value. What happens is, when the person develops greater self-value, they develop greater wisdom. Then they actually start to see, oh, I'm being used. Oh, our leaders are crooks. Oh, they're liars too. Wow. Huh. Oh, I see. You really don't care about me. You're just using me. Okay, I think I should leave.
But in this society, if they start to have a big voice on their own and start to take care of themselves and say, well, I'm quitting this cult and I don't stay there and all, they're gonna be called selfish. I mean, for some people.
Absolutely. I mean, look, angry dogs bark. People who are sick vomit. That's all. It doesn't matter what people say. It matters what is. Now, yeah, sure. If I'm involved in exploiting you I'm not happy if you want to get out. I might say anything and do anything to keep you from getting out so that I can keep exploiting you. That's normal. Some of the people who are saying such things, you're selfish, sincerely believe it because they themselves have taught themselves from how they were told before that freedom, or what's called self-empowerment, self-affirmation, self-valuing, being good to yourself, doing what you want, autonomy, liberty, freedom, self-determination is wrong or selfish. If they think it's wrong or selfish, then they'll call you selfish and they'll blame you. They may not think it's selfish, or they don't know what is what, but they just want to control you and take advantage and not lose you. So, of course, the question is, what is right action? Mm-hmm. It depends on what path you're on. If you're on the negative path, right action is deception and force and domination. If you're on the positive path, right action is love, wisdom, truth, honesty, kindness, goodness, openness, helpfulness, freedom, justice, righteousness, the truth of who you are, being true to yourself, and following your own will. Now, that may get you into trouble, but then you can follow your own will to get out of trouble, or learn how you got into trouble, and learn not to do it again. No problem. So, self-sacrifice can certainly be a path to love. It can also be the naive compliance with deceptive exploitation, right? Naive complying, obeying, submitting to deceptive, self-serving leadership, which is aping positivity, pretending to be positive by counseling a virtue that in their case is not a virtue, or may be a virtue, but they're actually exploiting it for their own personal gain, and they're lying, and they're taking advantage of the person who is naively self-sacrificing. And so in exploitative institutions, like religion, like school, like corporation, like the military, like the government, like the media, like companies, even some families, it's not unusual, as you say, that the virtue of self-sacrifice, which is really giving, it's really caring, true self-sacrifice in the positive way as a true virtue, is basically demonstrating in a certain situation, not necessarily always, demonstrating that you can put others before the self. You can value others more than selfish taking. You can value self-offering, truly not selfish or self-sacrifice, in its true meaning as a virtue, is an offering of oneself for the benefit of others, without seeking gain, without seeking to take, but simply seeking to give, seeking to be of service, seeking to be helpful in someone else's benefit. Now, again, that true virtue can be exploited by negative leadership, or leaders, or institutions, or naive leadership that is simply following the same reflexive, automatic pattern of unthinking or unwise self-sacrifice, and feels everyone should do it too, that they are exploiting naive people, or self-punishing people, or masochistic people, or people with karmic guilt, or people who have bad karma and have hurt others before and have been overly selfish before, who karmically are there because they need to rebalance, and so by their karmic guilt they feel they deserve somewhat to be exploited. They deserve to be taken advantage of because they were a fucker before, because they hurt people before, and they sense it. And so some of the people who put themselves into situations where they're exploited for being naive are there because they really do need a karmic corrective, because they really were bad or harmful to others before in a past life. So then being exploited and then eventually coming to realize they don't need to be exploited, they don't want it, is the learning process of self-forgiveness. It's part of their process of moving to self-forgiveness. But in general, self-sacrifice as a virtue, as a true virtue, is seeking the benefit of others without any gain beyond that. And so there are many cases where it's a very high pure virtue, right? A man marries a woman who gets sick and takes care of her for the rest of her life while she's bedridden. Parents marry and their beautiful child has an accident and they have to take care of the child for the next 40 years. That's pretty self-sacrifice, because what do they get? What do they get? They get nothing. What they get is a lot of effort. the need to sacrifice and offer themselves to somebody who can't give much back. And that is exactly what some souls need sometimes. So self-sacrifice can be a great virtue. On the other hand, it can be exploited by naive or deliberately deceptive leadership. And so it depends on the quality of mind of the one doing the self-sacrifice. It can be very noble. It can be very naive. It can be exploited. It could be not exploited, but appreciated. Meaning, the institution, the organization, like a small group normally, truly wants the good and uplift of all. And they're all self-sacrificing or self-offering to each other.
Yeah,
right?
offering.
I mean, sitting in meditation for world peace could be called a self-sacrifice. You're not taking the benefit of, eating bonbons for an hour. You're not playing around doing nothing, or just chit-chat. You're actually sitting down, making some effort on behalf of world peace, or love light, or healing of the planet. That's a kind of self-sacrifice too. And then too, there are institutions that command people to be doing such a thing to exploit them. And then they take their money, and then they make them wash the floors. And then they make them go out and sell flowers. So, it goes on and on. In general, the socially sanctioned self-sacrifice is an aspect of low self-esteem. And so many of the people who are not institutional, meaning they're not a cult leader or a military leader or a school leader or a family leader or a corporate leader, but they're just telling people or believing that you should sacrifice yourself or you shouldn't be selfish, have agreement with the common understanding of that, because in some way they think that it's wrong to put themselves first. Now, nobody achieves freedom without putting themselves first. Meaning nobody, no Buddha, no avatar, no sage, no arhat, no adept got that way without saying no to other people. Without saying no many times to other people or other situations wanting them to get involved. They said no. They left the family, they left society, they left the world to go off and do their thing. They didn't do it sacrificing and following what other people are telling them to do. They did that by saying no many times to many people in many ways, so they could go off alone and do their thing, which eventually got them to the point of freedom from delusion. So the early Buddhists, Theravadan Buddhists, are criticized by Mahayana Buddhists, Tibetans, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, Korean. They criticize the Theravadins and say, you're selfish. You listen to the teachings, you go off into the forest, you meditate alone, and you achieve enlightenment alone. What a self-centered guy you are, having no understanding of what enlightenment really is, because there's no self that's got it. There's nobody who gets that thing in the end.
Yep.
There's just the freedom. One portion of the infinite ocean becomes perfectly crystalline. One portion of the infinite ocean becomes perfectly transparent.
So it helps everybody.
It helps the entirety of creation. The entirety of creation is benefited by any soul who achieves freedom from the octave, or harvestability, or any gain in love light. It helps everybody. So those foolish Mahayanists, in my view, first of all, they don't even know what first stage enlightenment is. Secondly, they don't even know they have no idea, of course, what Nibbana is. They have no idea what Nirvana is. And so they imagine that person is being selfish because he's not doing social work in the city, that he's not praying for world peace or offering the benefits to all beings. There's a saying in Mahayana too, though some people do understand that. It's the people who haven't achieved something that don't get it, and they think that everybody else, or the Hinayanists, they call them Hinayana, lesser vehicle, inferior, wretched vehicle, rather than Mahayana, we're the great yana. You're the low yana. We're the big yana, you're the little yana. So even Buddhists can be idiots too. But there is a saying in Mahayana Buddhism that, the work is to save all beings. And you will save all beings when you fully realize there have never been any beings who needed to be saved. When you realize there are no beings that ever needed to be saved, you have saved all beings. So saving all beings doesn't mean, standing on the street corner giving out flowers, or going to the hospice, or going to the hospital, or being a counselor, or being in society, or talking to anybody. Saving all beings basically means freedom from the delusion that there are beings who are not yet saved. Then, because that's freedom from the belief in separate self. Then you're saying, this is not an ocean of little demented waves that need to be saved. This is the one ocean of life that's pulsating in all these forms all the time, which is lila, or play, cosmic play. You are all dancing thoughts. There are no beings that need to be saved, because it's all twinkling thought in the mind of the infinite Logos. Who needs to be saved? It's the infinite Logos, twinkling, according to the laws that it itself has created for its own progression or its own self-experiencing. So that's a recognition that there are no beings who ever needed to be saved. Now, some Mahayanists understand that, but not too many. Because it's very subtle. It's an understanding of emptiness. Form is empty, empty is form. There isn't any being who needs to be saved. You are not a being who needs to be saved. The whole issue of saved, not saved is a construct. It's yet another product, believed false product of the naming activity. When there's no naming activity, there's no self to be saved, there's no others to be saved. There's no path, there's no fruit, there's no samsara, there's no nirvana. There's just the one ocean of vibratory, bliss or vibratory life. Now, that may be true. People can still, have distortions. I still have distortions even if I know that to be true. So, but, humanity as a whole is not very happy with itself. There's not very good mental health in this planet. And that's basically because, to a large extent, humans have done a lot of harming of self and other in past lives. The residual of that, as the Buddha said, Gautama Buddha said, is regret. And so Gautama said, that the purpose of Shila, or discipline, or virtue, it's really virtue, Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, the three, virtue, goodness, the prevention of regret. The purpose of Shila is the prevention of regret, which means to not form patterns in mind of self-disdain, self-hatred, or self-regret, self-blame, ultimately.
New attachment to new belief.
Well, it's not just attachment to belief, but it's the particular belief of self-inadequacy. If I spent a lot of time hurting people, and I realize now finally that that's not good, that that's bad, and I wish I hadn't done it, that regret will be with me a long time until I forgive myself fully, until forgiveness arises fully. Forgiveness arising fully takes a bit of time, because forgiveness is a blend of love and wisdom both. The person has to go through a lot of suffering before they can get into true forgiveness, which means they will have that regret and self-blame for many incarnations. And that's why the Buddha said Shila is important. Shila meaning, again, virtue or goodness, benevolence, non-harmfulness, harmlessness, ahimsa. So, because of profound, subtle, pervasive, historical, well-established and unrecognized self-blame in Earth humanity, people are very willing to take upon themselves the commands of dominators for self-sacrifice and assume the misunderstanding that putting yourself first equals selfish. Putting yourself first doesn't mean putting yourself over anybody. It may not. If I want to go to the bathroom, I stand up and go to the bathroom. That's being selfish? It's not. Selfish really means putting oneself first at the expense of others, taking at the expense of others. And selfless, or self-offering, self-sacrifice, really means putting others' benefit ahead of my own. And that, is any form of service to other, actually. Although you can benefit a lot from the service too. But people very much have low self-value, low self-esteem. And so they're real suckers for institutional commandments of self-denying the belief that self-denying, self-rejecting self-sacrifice is virtue. Self-denying, self-rejecting self-sacrifice is not a virtue. It's self-punishment. It's self-limitation. It's a lack of love to self. So there's a lot of confusion about all that.
Thank you.